Council chambers for a special general committee 2017 budget meeting. This is our operating budget. Councilors' declarations of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof, please. Seeing none, may I please have a motion to approve the agenda as has been amended? Councilor Maracus, thank you. Councilor Humphreys, second. Comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. We normally start with the public consultation, but there are no members of the public here this morning. So we'll move right into Mr. Elliott with his delegation / presentation. Mr. Elliott, the floor is yours, sir.
Good morning. Thank you. It's a privilege to be here doing this capital budget. For myself, I realized this morning this is my 15th municipal budget that I've led a council through, and so that is a bit of a milestone.
You're still standing?
Pardon me?
And you're still standing?
I'm still standing. I've got a little more gray hair. My kids aren't quite as young as they were, and I sleep by myself most nights. So times have changed, and I have gained weight, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Councillor Kim. I just want to just quickly go through this presentation again, just to refresh your mind and let you get your coffee working for you. So last time we had no decisions, but today we are going to be making decisions. And just as a reminder, today is a general committee, and it is my intent that if we're able to get through all of the capital budget today, that capital budget will be summarized in a standalone report and will come to you directly to council. It will not go through a GC cycle, because this is a GC. And we're hoping that that will come forward on November the 8th. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to go through your binder. We've got our 10-year capital investment plan in there, which includes the asset management plan, and then our detailed 2017 capital. We have done a lot of work in the last 5, 6, 7 years that I've been participating in, and I know that there was a lot of work in advance of that as well. But we've got our consolidated 10-year capital investment plan. It's currently valued at over $200 million. We build our annual cash to capital every year. We're aligning our decisions for our capital to our asset management plan. The asset management plan is very much like the workbook. It's the playbook. How does the fleet manager assess his fleet? How does he assess each vehicle? When does he make the decision for replacements and refurbishments? And so that's set out in the asset management plan. Then the 10-year capital plan is just the fruit of that labor. We work to maximize our grant money. We're constantly shooting documents back and forth between the feds of the province and AMO and ourselves, and maximizing our grant money. We have got council approval on some fundamental principles and a fundamental budget process. Almost becomes more important in the operating side of things, the budget process that we agreed upon. We have the Finance Advisory Committee now working through that process. They've completed two departmental detailed budget reviews, giving assurance to this table when we get to the operating budget that those areas have been looked at in greater scrutiny than normally happens here. We've increased the financial management and the accountability of all of our departments, and engaging with the managerial layer as well. The context, our net worth continues to increase, mostly through the assumption of assets from developers, but also the acquisition and construction of new assets, such as the GLC, including our cash and investments of about $100 million. Our capital assets, amortized cost is about $434, up a little bit. Those tax-funded capital reserve contributions we're making currently about 4.2 of tax dollars goes to capital reserve. And as a percentage of amortization, it's actually decreasing, but it's a higher number. It's 36% of our amortization. Ideally, as an initial benchmark, and there's very few municipalities that have achieved it, but there are a few, is to get to at least 100% of amortization. Amortization is the historical cost of what you actually paid for it. So if you had a roof that's gone through 2 cycles, your last roof cost you $5,000 to replace. Your next one's going to cost you $18,000 to replace. Right now, we're only contributing 36% of the 5, not 36% of the 18. And so that's, it's still quite a distance away, and that's why we have to continue to increase our contributions every year. Our cash to capital
Mr. Elliott, if I could just hold you
Yep.
for a second. Council, I would like to acknowledge the wonderful haircut that just walked into the room.
Councillor Peary, I mentioned that I perhaps had a little more silver hair than when I first started budgets 15 years ago, and Councillor Kim, to your right, just suggested I was also a little lighter. As you can see, through applying a discipline of long-range financial planning and long-range visioning for the organization, trying to get control of the finances, we've been able to do that in the last 6-7 years, where we've got a great deal of stability in those contributions of cash to capital. Prior to that, it was up. We'd actually claw it back in a couple of years there. So that stability has given stability to the taxes themselves, to the taxpayer for their predictability. It's given stability to our organization on the administrative side, as well as, I hope, to the political side as well. Our asset consumption ratio, we have fairly young assets, about 26% used up. So that $5,000 roof is only about 4 of 12 years old, and the rest of it is ahead of us. This gives us longer range to make those financial adjustments. We can do it in smaller steps. City of Toronto, for example, on their sewers, perhaps the opposite here. And so it's a dramatic pressure, and they're getting caught off guard. We're fortunate that we're a young municipality and rapidly growing, and it's keeping us in this position. Our owned assets, this is a detailed slide, almost too many numbers, and I apologize for that, but you can see that our underground stuff is in blue, the large pie on the blue, almost a third of our assets are underground, out of sight, requiring specialized materials and tools, assessment techniques, and some very specialized skills in assessing and maintaining those. But equally so, our land values, our roads and sidewalks, linear assets are the greens, and buildings in purple, and that's where the dollars are. And that's what's depreciating. The land is not, but the depreciating assets are significant, and most of that is underground. Our reserve funds, generally speaking, we're in fairly good shape. Our new infrastructure assets are there. The infrastructure sustainability is there. New infrastructure includes development charges, cash in lieu money, and the like. Infrastructure sustainability is our repair and replacement reserve funds. We've got some special purpose reserves in there, stabilization reserves, which is the tax rate stabilization, utility rate stabilization reserves. But then our hydro funds are still there in the light blue on the left, representing a significant portion of that. But either way, those hydro funds, even though they haven't got a specific price tag or a specific purpose established for them yet, they are helping us through our financial circumstances. We can borrow against them internally. They prop up our balance sheet, and they're very helpful to us. So the financial context, let's talk about the debt. We've got about $12 million in debt. This has stepped up because of the JOC financing. As those DCs continue to come in and as the sales of land continue, that will come down. The debt and the interest payment limit is about $16 million per year is our limit. And right now we're paying about $2 million. And so we've got lots of capacity for unused debt, but we have to do it wisely. The 10-year capital plan, We've got over almost 300 projects, $200 million. A lot of repair and replacement, of course, because that's where we spend a lot of our money, is on the existing assets and maintaining that. Roads are representing over 50% of that portion, buildings another 14. And then the growth of new projects, we've got 93 of those in here today. And that includes some library space, a new community center and fire hall. Those are all in the 10-year capital plan. And the R&R reserves, when we look at repair and replacement reserves, this graph has three components to it. The blue is the spend, and so this just falls out of the departments following their asset management plan and their asset management strategies. They develop their replacement plan over the years. It's going to be volatile. The roof doesn't happen every year, so it's going to add a spike. And so the spend varies. And then the red line is the contribution to those reserves from the tax. And so that is showing a continual increase over time. And then the light green is the balance of the reserve. And so that can fluctuate as well. And so overall, when we look at all of our R&R reserves, we see that we end this 10-year window in good shape as long as we stick to that plan. Our target, theoretically, is to have a contribution of approximately the 10-year average spend, but also with a balance of twice the 10-year spend. And that would be allowing some fluctuation. If we don't increase our contributions, this is what that same graph looks like with the same planned spend. The assets still need replacing. We can't change that a lot. But the balances and the reserve health take a dramatic change if we don't make those minor increments each year. So that's what we need to do, and what it would look like, and what we can be proud of at the end. This is a very difficult legacy to leave behind. Our 2017 capital plan is about $36 million this year. It's a little larger than it has in the past. But as I said to somebody before, if you knew that you had 2 kids heading to university next year, and you've been doing your financial plan, and you've got the cash, it's not going to be a problem that you suddenly have that investment to make next year. When you get to that September, you don't suddenly decide, well, hang on a sec, Susie, you can't go to university because we normally don't spend this kind of money. You've got the cash, you foresaw the need, you prepared the financial plan, and now the time is there, and it's time to lay those cash out. You knew it was coming. And so we have that scenario this year. We knew that there was going to be a little bit more spending happening this year, and we were prepared for it. We are prepared for it, and we're okay to proceed. Our infrastructure repair, there's a split out there, and I believe you still have your printouts from last time of this presentation. Our growth in infrastructure, we've got our fire hall in there, skewing this over. That's one of the large items in here. And so today we're going to go through this. We're going to talk about the asset management plan briefly, or actually field any questions you may have on that. We're not asking for an adoption of that because we do that only once per term. Then we'll look at the 10-year capital program, where you'll have an opportunity to flip through that and ask any questions about anything. If council wants to kibosh any particular vision that staff have showing in there, that can happen. If you know that, for example, there's a community center in there in the future, if you don't want to build a community center, let us know now. That helps us with our financial plans. And it helps Al try to figure out how to deliver his service. It could be a road, it could be anything. I'm not suggesting that there's anything in there that needs to be taken out. So then we'll get down to the detailed 2017 capital projects. Today, in your additions, there are 4 new capital sheets that have been inserted into the plan this year. That's arisen through our work on our developing the operating budget, but also a couple of items that have come up in the interim, and we just want to get them on the table today. After inserting those 4 pages, there's a couple of new updated summary pages for you. So as I said before, we anticipate that following today, hopefully we can get through all of this today. We'll come back directly to council on the 8th of November with a report. Are there any questions, Mr. Mayor, on the direction of the day?
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. First of all, could I have a motion to receive Mr. Elliott's presentation? Councillors Tom and Kim. Any comments or questions from Mr. Elliott on his presentation at this point? Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. You said a couple of things. One is about the reserve funds. You said the reserve funds are generally in good shape. Could you say where they're not? Or could you explain more fully the word generally?
Microphone, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. In regards to the reserve funds, there are some areas where our development charges are overspent, call it invested in advance of receipt, and that draws us down at some times. It can pose a bit of an issue. But with the hydro funds there as the cushion, financially, I'm not scrambling to make payroll. And that's a good situation. There's some municipalities where there's treasurers freaking out on Friday trying to figure out how the cash is going to line up for payroll. And so we haven't got those situations, but there are a few areas, but my concern would be in the development charge area. We're nearing build out, and so we're getting to that stage where we're investing in some of the last infrastructure for the growth related stuff, but the funding is yet to come in. Fire hall is going to be significantly overdrawn.
Thank you. And my understanding is that's very often or usually the situation.
That's correct.
But when we're doing the internal boring, are we paying interest to ourselves? And is that DC eligible?
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chair, when we internal borrow, if, for example, when the fire goes in the negative, we report it in this room as a negative DC balance. From a financial accounting perspective, we can't, and so we formalize an internal borrowing. The DC that is overdrawn pays the other fund interest, and so the fund that has the money doesn't lose, and the DC that is overdrawn, the interest on that borrowing is an eligible DC recoverable.
Thank you. Could you go to the slide that says total debt?
Yes.
So looking at 2015, hold on. So the 2015 total debt is there. The debt and interest payment is quite a bit more. I don't know. Could you explain that to me, please?
Certainly. Let me walk you through this. The top line is the actual debt, the amounts that we owe. So in 2014, we had some balances still around for the library and for the SARC on our books. We had a little bit of the JOC there. We have, during the 2015 year, we took a large advance on our line of credit for the JOC. That's why it went from 4.2 to 11.9. That's the amount that we owe. The next line is actually a limit. It's a threshold that the province sets for us. How much debt can we assume? And they express it not in a total amount of borrowing, but rather a total amount of debt service payment in any one year. And they say for Aurora, we can incur up to $16.1 million of debt service payments per year. And so the third line says that in 15, our debt service payment was 1.9.
Thank
So
you.
Our limit is 16. We only paid 1.9 because that's all that we incurred.
And what about the 2016 figures? We're not going to have that before budget, but you're going to be able to make a best guess on that?
2016, the debt is going to be slightly higher. We did have some last draws on the JOC as it was coming into conclusion, but we're still nowhere near our debt limit. I think our debt our debt payments as a percent of our limit are running around 13% for
Thank
16.
you. Last question. When you're looking at, our reserve funds and the money we spend, and it's kind of like this, you said the spending is volatile. Can I take that to mean that this spending is uneven? I don't think the word volatile is, because it is predictable.
You're absolutely right, and I apologize. I did use that word volatile, and I shouldn't have. Here it is here. The dark blue line, the dark blue vertical lines, for those that have difficulty seeing these, is the anticipated capital spending arising from our 10-year capital plan for repair and replacement. So you can see it's up and down. In 2022, it looks like it hits a low of just over $2 million, $2.5 million, but it can be as high as almost $6 million in 2018. So it's quite uneven. It shouldn't be volatile in that volatility suggests that it changes dramatically from one year to the next. That 2018 spend, I'm hoping that when we get to 2018, it's still about that amount, because that tells me that our asset managers are doing a good job at planning, and it helps us when we're trying to do our financial plans, that's the target we're reaching. We're trying to put 2 kids through university in 2018, and we prepare for it. If that suddenly changes from year to year, that 1 year's anticipated spending has fluctuated quite a bit. Clearly, it causes a little issue for our financial plan.
Thank you. The key word there to me is anticipated. We're more or less anticipating this, and we have a sustainability reserve fund for anything that's unforeseen.
Correct.
Thank you.
Excuse me, any other comments or questions for Mr. Elliott on his presentation? All in favor of receipt of the presentation then? Contrary, that is carried. Thank you very much. Mr. Elliott, do you want to walk us through then the item 1, which is tab 9, the asset management plan?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you. The asset management plan, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, is more the playbook of how the asset managers. We have one manager looks after our IT assets. I'm sorry, Linda, this is getting a little loud for me, I think. We have an asset manager that looks after the IT assets. We have one that is specifically assigned to fleet, one for facilities, one for roads, one for sewers. And so these asset managers have documented how they make their decisions, the general condition and shape and the quantity of their asset base, and how they evaluate what their planned levels of service are and how they hope to achieve that through those assets. So this asset management plan, it's our intent that we just bring it back once per term, because it's the playbook. It shouldn't be changing year to year. There's some tables of financial numbers in there. We update those every year because they're falling out of the 10-year detailed plans. But for all intents and purposes, the textual content of this document has not changed since the last time you saw it. We asked you to approve it last year, and so this year we're just asking you to receive it.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. So the motion would be that we receive the asset management plan for information. Could I have a motion for that, and then we'll direct any questions to Mr. Elliott? Councillors Gartner and Maracas, any comments or questions on the asset management plan for Mr. Elliott? Councillor Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On page 19, we have under pedestrian paths and road luminaries, we have the rating of very poor, poor and very poor. Through you to Mr. Simonovskis. When we have a rating like that, is there a liability issue to the town, especially under the very poor category?
Mr. Simonovskis?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor. The rating of very poor is suggesting that asset needs to be addressed or taken care of, and I would suggest as part of the strategy that we've implemented through 2015, or sorry, through 2016, is the replacement of the lighting from our current high-pressure sodium to LED lights. So the inventory itself has been improved, so that rating would be adjusted going forward from the street light perspective.
So just to follow, it was very poor and we're improving it, and that's
Correct.
covering us.
Correct.
And what about just below that, solid waste, facilities? That's also very poor.
So the facilities is another area that we're addressing with regards to asset condition assessments. We've had a need to do detailed asset condition assessments starting 2 years ago, and we actually have a consulting firm that was retained earlier this year who's going through all the facilities and doing detailed condition assessments. The risk there, as far as the facility being rated very poor, is that we know we have some aging facilities, and the cash flow or the capital spend that you see currently does not include detailed condition assessments around windows, other sort of building elements that are longer term, that have longer term life, but do eventually need to be addressed. So that report will be completed this year, and you're going to see adjustments both in the capital spend in the future years as of 2017 or 2018 capital plan, as well as cash flows, and then probably a change in that rating as we start implementing some of those larger improvements.
And would council have a list of the very difficult problems that need remediation? Is there a list in here somewhere?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, if I may, the initial capital plan that was developed 5 years ago for all the facilities was based on staff assessments of all the conditions. And once this report is completed and we have a full assessment of all the components of the buildings, that report would come to council, I imagine as part of a summary of the report, as well as adjustments to the 10-year capital plan and changes to the AMP.
Councillor?
But I'm assuming that some of these problems are going to be discussed by council for remediation as part of the individual projects?
Yes, we would have to look at where the issues are, and as an example, this building would eventually need window replacements.
I'm sorry?
This building would need
Yeah.
window replacements, so that would be a fairly significant project that we'd have to factor into our forecast.
Okay, and as we go through the capital projects, through the various sheets, you'll point out something that might be under that list that we're going to be addressing.
Through you,
now.
Mr. Mayor, what I can say is what's in a 10-year plan right now for all the facilities are all elements that we've identified as needing replacement. The next layer of elements may be things that are less obvious to us as operators of the facilities, but more prevalent to professionals who actually do those kind of evaluations. So what we have in here now is intended to bring our facilities from a very poor rating to a higher rating, and we are moving in that direction. I mean, we have new buildings in the portfolio this year compared to when this plan was initially done. The Operations Center is one example of a building that brings up our entire work. The AFLC project that was completed in 2015, which brought up a lot of the work in that area, as well as work that we have planned for the SARC and other areas within the portfolio that you'll see in the 10-year plan today.
Councillor?
Thank you. On page 25, we're talking about service levels, last paragraph at the bottom.
Is there a question?
When we had our service level review in the last term of council, I don't remember, I remember with respect to Parks and Rec, we were higher than the average service level, but I don't remember there was any indication by the consultant that, that there was any risk involved in our service levels in other areas, or not achieving our service levels in other areas. Maybe that's something you don't want to speak to now, but that is a question that I would like to have answered at some point.
Anything else, Councillor?
I'd just like to know if Mr. Simonovskis wants to answer that now or at a later time.
Mr. Elliott?
Mr. Elliott?
Or Mr. Simonovskis?
I can provide some comment just with regards to the assets that I oversee. So what that statement really refers to is just what I described. So we have a 10-year plan right now that's based on replacements, repairs of facilities, roads, infrastructure that we've assessed through our internal expertise. What this statement is basically saying is as new things emerge or as new information becomes available, it does have an impact on the asset plan. And Mr. Elliott mentioned earlier that the whole intent of having that longer-term vision is that you always have some money in reserve, so as that plan is adjusted, that the risk is mitigated through looking at the longer-term vision. A good example right now is with as I described, the facility condition assessment report. So that's a more detailed assessment of our assets, our facility assets, which may identify additional works that we didn't know needed to be done or weren't aware of, and that has a financial impact to the plan. Typically, as you can imagine, an asset plan never gets cheaper, it gets more expensive, and that's the risk.
Thank you. I'm just trying to put that word risk in perspective because, of course, we want to mitigate risks. But when we have it in a report, risk says to me liability. So I just want to clarify that that isn't really what you're saying.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, that's exactly what we're doing through this. By having that longer-term vision, that's the whole intent of mitigating risk. So if there's an element that needs repair or attention in the plan, we can avoid having a significant cost in one particular year by distributing that or spreading that replacement over multiple years. And also forecasting when it's going to come into play. So that's how we manage the risk, rather than working year to year and then realizing next year we have to spend twice what we spent this year without having any foresight. So that's how the risk is mitigated.
Thank you. Last question. Somewhere in here, I have written down page 64, but I can't find it. It's talking about railway culverts. So that would be a tunnel carrying water under a road. So for railway culverts, is it the town that's responsible for that, or would that be a provincial issue?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure where that might be in the plan. I'm just trying to think. I don't think we actually have any railway crossings. Now, it might be related to underpasses, which are, I think, part of the strategy as well. Our culverts are primarily under our roads network. I don't
Okay.
believe we have anything under the railway within Aurora.
Okay, I'll see if I can find the particulars.
Any other comments or questions on the asset management plan? Councillor Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It says that we received this asset management plan December 8th, 2015.
Mr. Elliott?
Through you, Mr. Chair, actually, we had a draft asset management plan that we shared at the end of 14, and then at the end of 15, we made some final revisions throughout the year, and then we asked for council to adopt it at that time, and so it was approved last year. And our intent now is to go on a 4-year cycle of updating. So some of the information that Councillor Gardner has referred to will be updated in the next 4-year update, and so we anticipate just having council go through this in detail once per term.
So, Mr. Elliott, I'm impressed with this, what we're receiving today. I've just never seen it presented as this. It's very detailed.
It is.
And so, is this the first time we've been presented this
Mr.
in
Elliott?
this form, like a format?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, again, this would be the third time that it's been at this table. Once in the form of a draft, just for information, 1 year out. The province said you've got about a year and a half to get an asset management plan together, and it has to be approved by council, failing which you won't get your gas tax money. So we wanted to show council that we were well ahead of the curve. We had a draft 1 year in advance of when we needed it. We didn't need you to approve it at that time. We knew it was still a little rough on the edges. We refined it throughout the following year. We presented it last year in time for the province's deadline. We went through that at budget time. We didn't spend a lot of time on it because we had already seen it once, and now again. But as I said, this is really a playbook for the administration side of managing and maintaining the assets. And so it's important for council to know, A, that we have it. It gives you confidence that we have a method to, I use the phrase method to the madness. How do you come up with all these decisions, and how do you come up with all these projects to do, and how do you come up with your 10-year plan? This is the playbook of how each manager does that.
No, I appreciate that, Mr. Elliott, and I think it's good management practice to do so. In fact, that's why council last term invested in the software for it, and the staff has spent a great deal and invested their resources to put this together. So I understand all that. I just haven't seen or haven't read through this, and I'm wondering, what did I miss? How did I just not even look at this? And now we're looking at it, a budget for the, in my mind, this is the first time I've sort of looking at this in some detail, and I'm overwhelmed with all the information and the detail going forward in all the specific areas. But I know why it was done. I was just sort of wondering, you know, sometimes we have, like our procedure just last week, we spend a great detailed time in a workshop element to do that, so that we all sort of get caught up and understand what it is, the value, and moving forward with suggestions and additions. So that's really just a comment rather than a question. So I appreciate, and I've always been supportive of moving forward and managing our assets for the very reasons that we have to be able to foresee budget, incrementals. You know, we have to realize what it is and rationalize why we're moving forward in the way we do at budget. And this, as you say, is a playbook. It's a good way of framing that sort of idea.
Mr. Elliott?
If I may, Mr. Chair, this asset management plan is very, very much an administrative side of the table item. It does not have a direct influence on the activities of council. It speaks to what the service levels we understand them to be, and how we are trying to achieve those through our assets, and the decision points and sort of assessment conditions and everything else. It's a necessary document that we now have to have on our side of the table. The involvement of council in establishing it and writing it and how we do it is far less important than, for example, a procedural bylaw. What is really important, though, is that you know that we have it. That's what I think is most important. You know that we have this playbook and that we follow it.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Any other comments or questions on the asset management plan, please? All in favor of receipt for information? Contrary? That is carried. Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Tab 10, the 10-year capital plan, again to be received for information. If someone put that on the table, we'll ask Mr. Elliott to speak to it. Councilor Maracus and Gardner. Mr. Elliott.
Again, through you, this 10-year capital plan is a planning document. It sets out what we see coming down the road, specific projects. Having exercised the disciplines of our asset management plan, looking at what we own, what we're about to acquire, what we see ahead, these are the these are the capital projects that the asset management or asset category managers see coming down the road. They've attempted to value them to the best of their ability. It then becomes an input for us in finance to develop the financial plan to go with it. So they say, this is what I need, and I'm trying to manage my resources, scarce resources, recognizing we have scarce resources. This is what I see coming down the road. Can you plan for it? And so then we now know that we've got two children going to university next year and 5 3 years later. So we can set those financial plans in motion. So I'd suggest that if there's any questions about anything specific in here, that you could raise them now, or you could raise them at any time during the year. This is a very fluid document. It lives throughout the year. It changes throughout the year. But we do post this on the website once per year. And this way, if somebody comes to you and says, why are we reconstructing Blueberry Street and not my street, we can you can look down here and say, I see that your street is scheduled for 2019 because these other streets obviously must be in more dire condition or there's more urgent issues related to those streets than yours. And it shows the plan. Yes, your street will get done, just not this year. There's others more important at this point.
Councillors, comments or questions for any of the directors on what might be in the 10-year capital? Excuse me, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Dodd. I guess just to clarify the process. So there are a number of projects in here that I'd like to just, get some questions and some answers for, sorry. The 2017 projects, I'll wait until we go through the actual ones, but there's some future ones out there. Not as Director Elliott put it about kibosh in anything, but is now the best time to open up those discussions on whether or not they should stay on this 10-year plan at this time?
Mr. Elliott or Mr. Nader Rosny?
I was going to suggest we could probably spend some time here if there's some large issues that Councillor Thompson sees as potentially items for discussion. We can then follow it up with a different discussion at a different time, though. I don't think we want to go into all the details of every little project throughout this, but if there's something that is obviously of interest, let's have a short discussion and perhaps we can follow it up.
Councillor?
Thank you. So I'm sure others have questions, so I'll just start off with a few. Page 33, under the repair and replacement projects, it's project 72196. It says future facilities maintenance. It has $500,000 allocated every year for the next 9 years for $4.5 million. What does future facilities maintenance mean? And I'll
Yes.
Mr. Simonauskas, presumably.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this actually speaks to what I described earlier to Councillor Gartner with regards to the more detailed facility condition assessment that we're doing. Once we have the details of the various aspects completed, then this will be converted into specific projects. It's essentially a placeholder. We used the same strategy when we were doing our stormwater master plan, which was in creation over the last 3 years, and we had a $500,000 cash flow placeholder for that. And now, as the projects are coming in, we're changing those into real projects. So it's to allow for some stability in that 10-year forecast.
Great. So my understanding for now, it's a placeholder. In future, it'll be specified to what projects. Fine. Page 41, under growth and new, project 34527, Young Wellington intersection improvements. So in 2019, we have $312,000 allocated. Given that it's a regional intersection, I'm just curious to know what we're spending $312,000 on.
Mr. Simonauskas.
Certainly through you, Mr. Mayor. I have had conversations with the region on this intersection. It is a regional intersection, however, it does connect to a local road. So the intent with the 2017 budget was to initiate the needs and design elements of that intersection, specifically looking at a right turn lane southbound, and then determining which components are either our share or the region's share. We will have some cost to that project. I don't know exactly what, but I did want to allow for some expense there because typically when we do any project with the region, there's always a component, and I do know that they're moving to some new policies to try to recapture some of those investments, especially when they're resulting in local improvements. So it's more of a, well, it's risk mitigation to make sure we don't have a financial impact in a year or two when we go to construct, when the region all of a sudden comes back for some cost-sharing components.
Thank you. And next page, page 42, it's really all the grade-separated crossings. They're projects 73243 to 73246. In total, it's $3-4 million for grade-separated crossings at different locations. And just through Mr. Mayor to the appropriate director, have these all been approved, or are they all subject to a future report with more appropriate or detailed cost estimates? As we saw with the underpasses, the costs increased repeatedly, and so I'm just curious to know whether we've approved these and or how reliable these estimates are.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, these are a result of the Trails Master Plan that Council has approved. And as part of that Trails Master Plan, we had given estimates of what those crossings or grade-separated underpasses are going to be. This document reflects those numbers. We haven't gone into detailed work. In fact, if you look at this year's budget, we've actually got an item within that budget with regards to the crossing at John West Way. We need to get into design and then look at more detailed costing from that. But these are numbers directly out of that Trails Master Plan. So you will be getting future reports, just as you're getting this evening with regard, or today with regards to John West Way. You'll be getting detailed reports as we bring these things forward. But as you know, the Trails Master Plan identified not only cost and the timing of those underpasses.
I'll hold off for now and see if others have questions or items they'd like to bring forward.
Why don't you carry on?
So the next page, 74009, Museum Curator in 2018. I'm just curious why a staff position would be listed as a growth and new capital project.
It's page 43. Mr. Downey?
Through you, I don't believe that's a staff position, but rather capital investments towards supporting what's happening with the museum. So we should probably take the word curator out of there and just put museum. Thank you.
Great, thank you for the clarification. 2 items down, rail crossings, grade separated. We have $3 million associated, 73171. I'm just wondering if that's in relation to Mayor Dodd's notice of motion recently with regards to the train whistle, or is this completely separate?
Mr. Simmons?
Through you, no, it's not related to the mayor's motion. The rail crossing grade separation, once again, was identified within the Trails Master Plan. And they had detailed where those crossings were going to be. We were actually in discussions with Metrolinx with regards to where those are going to be and whether or not they're going to be incorporating those into the design when they bring through additional rails into Aurora. Because Council has identified in the Trails Master Plan that they would like us to look at grade separated crossings of the rail in 4 different locations. And so once again, these are estimates directly out of the Trails Master Plan, and the timing of those crossings was also identified in the Trails Master Plan. However, we may be accelerating those depending on what happens with Metrolinx.
Thank you. And through you to Mr. Downey again. Mr. Downey, if I look back at the Trails Master Plan, would I see an itemized list of all of the costs associated with the Trails Master Plan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, you would.
Great, thank you. So I'll review that again. Just the last one, 73299, it just says non-programmed park in 2C, $1.5 million in 2018. It's, if we get clarification, what do we mean by non-programmed park?
Mr. Downey?
It's page 43.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, I can't give you an answer on that one. I will find out and get something back to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Downey.
And then there still is money's being set aside for a new library in the future. As far as I know, and I don't sit on the library board anymore, the library has not taken a position on whether or not to build a new building. So perhaps maybe somebody from the library board could share whether or not that is the intent.
I'll go to Mr. Simonovskis first, and then
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can provide some information in speaking with the CEO of the library and recognizing that there is probably a much lower need for a second library in town, if at all. What I'd like to do, and we have started conversations with her, and we'll be engaging the CAO as well, to determine what kind of renovations the library is expecting to do at the existing library. I know the CAO mentioned to me that they're revisiting their strategy for space, and once they've revised that, they're going to be looking at renovations probably in 18, maybe 19, and then we would definitely I have looked at moving this actually beyond the 10-year timeframe. However, until we know exactly what the library wants to do, it's been put in here as a placeholder. But I think you're absolutely right. The chances of it actually proceeding are very low.
I agree, because just when I was sitting on the library board, there was talk about, utilizing new digital strategies, kiosks, satellites. I mean, there was a lot of other ideas rather than a bricks and mortar. And so I just going to Director Elliott's comment earlier about, revising things. I think this is one item that continues to be on the schedule, but yet, as far as I know, there's a movement away from a new bricks and mortar building.
Would any councillors from the library board like to speak to that? Councillor Peary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think any of us could happily speak to it. I would agree that it doesn't look like we're moving in the direction of a bricks and mortar facility at this point in time. There are some anticipated renovation works that are being contemplated. So, I agree with the price tag will probably be greatly reduced, but I don't think necessarily that we should be nixing the budget right now until we know for sure exactly what we're doing. But I think by next year's budget process, we'll know for sure what's going on and what's taking place, so that we'll be in a better position to help answer these questions. But I don't foresee a new library. We were getting a good enough usage and people were coming in from the other areas of town. So.
All right, I have Councillor Gartner, Councillor Maracas, Councillor Kim, Councillor Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And there is a lot of concern with the principals in the library that they need to renovate the space. Perhaps there's a roof area that could be enclosed. And I do believe Ms. Foster came to council a while back to discuss the possibility. I know there's a plan, and the price tag was the plan was big and the price tag was big too. But if we look at it if we compare it to what it would cost to build a new facility that Ms. Foster said we're not going to need, she said it in this council table, she didn't think there'd be a need in the next 10 years. And I think that's going to be coming to council at some point. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Nader-Rosny, I'm pretty sure that the library is going to be representing the plan. I think they're also working with through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Simonovskis. From the last meeting, I think Ms. Foster said she was working with Mr. Simonovskis.
I think that, and these points are valid, but I think the main point is that we have a placeholder in the budget at this point. There's no action being taken on it.
That's true.
And that we certainly will be looking forward for information from the library board coming back to us.
I just, originally, my back went up when I saw the amount of money and the extensive renovations to the library. But looking at it now in retrospect to the placeholder that we have in place, I'm not so worried. But there is a question, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Elliott, who's not here. Mr. Gartner.
He's sneaking in.
We've been collecting DCs for a new library. I think that's a question. Have we been collecting DCs for a new library? And if so, how does that reflect if we don't build a new library?
Mr. Elliott.
We have been collecting DCs, through you, Mr. Chair, to fund an expanded library program for the growth community. Whether that happens at the primary location or at a satellite location doesn't really matter. We can invest those dollars to expand the capacity of the existing library. Does that help?
That's great.
Councillor Kim, Councillor Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Elliott. It's just more of an administrative question. On page 8, you have IES 10-year spending outlook at 23 million and change. Or it could be Mr. Simonovskis. And on page 38, you have infrastructure at 20.1 million, but I just added the water and sewer projects at 2.9, and that adds up to the 23. I'm just wondering, for administrative purposes, why that was broken out on page 38 and not so on page 8, whereas everything else seems to be kind of the status quo.
Mr. Elliott?
Through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps we can have a more detailed conversation at the break and try to understand exactly the question. I think I see what you're looking at, but we'll have to take some looking around.
My second question is on page 6. At the bottom, talk about the buffer provided by the reserve accounts. So I understand, and you prepared us for it in previous years, that the heavy portion of our capital investments will happen between 2019 and 2021. And so we have the negative positions of 2.8 to 4.2 to 2.1 throughout those years. Is that, I just want to clarify that that's the negative position in the reserves and not necessarily the overall position of the town, correct?
That's correct. That's the negative position of those reserves at that time, and other reserves will be in positive balances, and so we offset them.
Okay. And so these reserves are from the new infrastructure reserves, and so the if there's positives reserves, then those other positive reserves will be supplementing the negatives, right?
This goes to internal borrowing, where an individual reserve that happens to be in credit will incur interest, while the one that we borrow from will earn it internally.
Councillor Tom?
Thank you, Mayor Daw. And my questions start on page 30. At the bottom of the Stronach Aurora Recreation Center chart, there's a line item in there that says SARC Improvements Canada 150 Intake 2, and it's for 2017 for $375,000. My question really is, then there's a number of things that are also going to be improved at the SARC, and I just want to know what the SARC improvements are from the Canada 150 fund. I mean, you don't have to get super specific, because my next questions are about, you know, showers and squash courts and all sorts of stuff. So I don't know if you could be as specific as possible without going into too much detail.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if you'd like to wait, Councillor, when we get to the detailed projects, because the sheet is in the details for 2017 for that $375,000 spend.
Oh, okay.
If you want to do that, or
Yeah,
or
that's
I
fine.
can
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so then moving to, let me just see here. Page 30, 722. Moving to page 31. And maybe this is on a sheet, I guess it could be. The squash courts floor replacement. We have a sheet about that later on. Correct me if I'm wrong, that's just the floors only for that?
I believe so. It's the new hardwood floors. For the
I was playing squash last night. I was talking to Howard, and lots of small improvements could be made to the squash courts that include more than just the floor. So it would be best to talk about that then as well.
Definitely, we can.
That's fine.
We can get to the sheet. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I guess the last one I have is page 43. There's two things. There's one is a artificial ice rink with boards, 2018 for $1.5 million. And then there's an outdoor rink with boards and refrigeration, which is for 2023 for $800,000. And I just want to know why, I mean, where the artificial ice rink is going to go and where that kind of came from. And then why is the outdoor rink with boards and refrigeration slated for 2023 while the artificial ice rink is slated for 2018? I just don't know what the importance is of artificial ice rink as opposed to an outdoor ice rink. So that's, well, I know the difference obviously, but I mean, why is one going in 2018 for 1.5 million when, what's the need for an artificial ice rink, I guess?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this, once again, is a placeholder for funds that a future report is going to come back to council. Okay. We have certainly fielded a number of calls from residents who would like to see predictable ice within our facilities. And so we have allocated funding towards those. It will be at council's approval, whether or not we move forward with those projects, but this is to let you know that we have identified that as a need, and we've put a cost to it. We feel that the artificial ice with the boards is the most important. It's more of a leisure facility as opposed to something for hockey, even though there will be some boards put up so that you could play shinny if you wanted to, but the whole idea is to get more of predictable ice for family skating and that type of thing. And then we also want to get into an outdoor ice rink to assist us in 2023. But as they say, they're just placeholders. You're going to see a report coming back to council. But you'll know that money's allocated, so if residents are asking you, are we ever looking at an artificial ice rink? Yes, we are, and we've got money allocated for it. It will then be council's decision whether or not we move forward.
So artificial ice is not, when I hear artificial ice, I think of the stuff they had at Chestwood Arena, which goalies use, which is like plastic.
No, refrigerated
Okay.
ice.
So I guess that's more of a specificity in language as opposed to, because I was like, why the hell are we going to build a plastic ice surface? I think that was ridiculous. So that's not what you're asking for.
No, a
Okay.
refrigeration plant, the whole bit.
Outdoor or indoor?
Outdoor,
So
refrigeration
outdoor
plant.
refrigerated skating area as opposed to a hockey rink.
Correct.
Okay.
Hockey rink in 2023.
Okay. That's it for now.
Councillor Marcus?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just through you to Mr. Simonauskas. Any of the numbers that have been provided for future years for any work that we're doing in combination with the region, I'm just wondering if they've accounted for the 12% that they charge us for administration fee and for inspection.
Mr. Simonauskas?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we do try to capture all the costs, and we are aware of the region's requirements.
Yeah, thank you. Even though you know how I feel about that, okay, I'm glad that you've put those into the numbers. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on the 10-year capital plan, Councillor Abel?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm looking at repair and replacement, and so we're not talking about any incentives to invest or new investment plans. I see there is some in that. I lost my spot here, Mr. Mayor. So under Parks and Recreational Cultural Services,
Can you give us a page reference, please?
I'm looking for a reference, but I'm at 42.
Thank you.
So under Cultural Services, can you highlight some of the items that are investments and new projects for cultural services? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there aren't any specific at this point. If council would like us to consider some, then we'd be happy to entertain that, put a cost to it, and find its way within the 10-year capital plan.
Well, I guess it's just a comment. We've got a cultural master plan that we've had since May of 2014, and I think somewhere along there we should be putting in some activity into that area. Public art, cultural hubs, cultural amenities, so there's nothing in place. Is there an explanation why?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as I say, the master plan certainly had identified some issues. It hadn't put any cost associated with these elements. If council would like us to pursue those and put some cost to those and find their way into the capital plan, we're happy to do so. But we haven't got any direction with regards to that at this point, other than these are things that council would like us to consider, but we haven't got any timeframes associated with those.
Thank you, Mr. Downey. Councillor Abel. Councillor Gartner, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following on Councillor Abel's comment, could we put a motion forward, or how would we do it if this council decides that they do want to put some money towards the cultural master plan planning?
Well, is this relative to 2017 budget or 2000 after that?
I think it is relative to 2017. I think we need to start in 2017. or at least have a placeholder in 2017. I mean, we really haven't discussed it fully at council, but we do have a plan. Usually we act on our plans.
I'm going to go to the CAO.
Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly the work that's being done on the cultural precinct would, I would think, qualify for some of that, and we know that there's work coming forward to council, but if council wants to put together or put aside a separate amount for the smaller aspects like public art and so on, then we could certainly set that up.
Councillor Gartner?
Thank you, and I think we have to see what happens with the cultural precinct, but I would like to see a placeholder in any case to further some of the more particular things in the cultural master plan. So I see there are other speakers.
I've got Councillor Humphreys for the first time yet.
Thank you. On that note, but then I have other questions.
Yeah, I think let's, at this point, let's stick to the 10-year capital plan.
Okay.
At least
Great.
get that done.
Okay. So I'll skip the same note of conversation. I just wanted to mention that. That's a
Well,
good idea.
you know, I think the point's well taken, but if there's specific questions to this, we can come back to it. Hold on, Councillor.
Okay, that's fair. I do have a couple of
Because
things I'd
people
like
have
to add.
questions to the plan that's already been presented.
Fine, then
That's
let's come
fair.
back to it.
We'll probably have to add that at the end or whatever, because there's a very good
I
point.
don't have a problem
raised.
having the conversation, but let's finish one before we start the other.
Yeah, okay, that sounds good. Just a question on page 42. I'm just curious about the Coots Pandolfo development area based on 100 per, I guess, linear meter. What's this project? It's for 2018. I know we have some things happening there, but just curious as to that. And then I do notice that the grade crossing at Yonge Street in Elderberry is way out. Way out, and does it look like it's gonna take that long to get where we're going, I think, for the trails? Just wondering about that, those two.
Mr. Downing?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, both of those projects, once again, are identified within the Trails Master Plan. And if you take a look at the Trails Master Plan, you'll identify where those trails are actually crossing. And we have identified a timing as to when we felt those are going to move forward. So I would suggest you can refer directly to the Trails Master Plan. I could put the plan up here if you like, and it can show you exactly where those trails are going. But we wanted to make sure that, once again, there was a placeholder in place so that money is allocated. So if council wished to exercise that element of the walkway throughout the Coots property, they'd be able to do so, and there'd be money allocated.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. I'm just wondering why we're waiting to 2018. I'd like to see that move a little bit closer, depending on the development of that property and the pet cemetery that's going on. So maybe we can look at this a little bit sooner. That's all.
Any other questions to the plan that's presented? Councillor Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to go backwards. On page 42, under growth and new facilities, 72266 Shepherd's Bush Aurora Youth Soccer Club building. I don't believe, I know that they came to council with an ask, but as far as I know, we haven't done any more work on that. And I don't believe it would have been in any 10-year plan.
There's a capital sheet in here.
I'm sorry, my question is, was this through you to Mr. Elliott or Mr. Downey, was this building anticipated in our capital master plan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, it was not.
So it's, okay, so it's an ask from the club, and we haven't had a report back on it as far as I know.
But there's a capital sheet in here.
Right.
Addressing,
But
so when-
we haven't had a report at council on it?
Nope.
No. Okay. Thanks. On page 43, I guess it's a kind of a question following on Councillor Humphreys. Rail crossings grade separated under the Emery lands. That's, there's a placeholder in 2025. That seems pretty far out to me. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to whoever wants to try that one.
Through Mr. Mayor, it's me. Once again, I'll refer you to the Trails Master Plan. It identified a number of trails. It also identified a time of which those trails were going to be developed. And so some of them are short-term, some of them are medium, some of them long-term. The actual Trails Master Plan went into a 15 to 25-year window. Many of these trails are short-term or medium-term that are identified within the Trails Master, within the 10-year forecast. A lot of the work that needs to be done with regards to trails has to do with development and when development's coming on board, and also land acquisition and when land could actually be acquired in order to put those trails in place. So our best guess right now is this is when it's going to take place. There's always an opportunity, it's a fluid document, to move this forward or move this earlier or move it later, but we've at least identified, and we've identified a year, and we've identified a cost.
Through Mr. Mayor, as a follow-up to that, I don't know when the Emery Business Park is going to be developed, but I would say it'll be before 2025. So we will be negotiating with them with respect to the land for the trails that we're going to need well in advance of 2025? Or perhaps to Mr.
Through you,
Remuno?
Mr. Mayor, we're already in negotiations with them. We already know where some of those trails are going to go, and we're in conversations with regards to them. But whether or not the lands are simply secured, and then the trail development occurs later on when it can actually connect to other developments adjacent to Emery, that's really where the timing comes in. It's a little bit like the Quick Copy Trail or the trail we just put in. It used to be the Quick Copy lands at Yonge and St. John. It was 20 years ago we had identified a trail and secured an easement, and it was just built last year.
Thank you. Just follow up, just as long as the principals involved with the Emery Business Park are fully aware that we have a trail system and that we're going to need some land there.
We were already in
Okay.
negotiations with them.
Thank you. On page 42, under growth and new, we have arboretum development. I'm not sure why it's not new. And didn't think it was under growth. So to whoever at the other side can comment on that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe it is actually growth in new. It's not a repair and replacement item. They are continuing to grow the arboretum, so this is money in order to permit them to continue to grow the arboretum. The reason it stops at 219 is Council had made a commitment to $1 million for the master plan, and we have, through the years, allocated funding towards the arboretum in amounts of generally $50,000 or $100,000. Sometimes there's a slight variation to those, but 219 identifies the sunset of that $1 million.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, have I missed this? Has the arboretum always been under growth and new?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, it has.
Thank you. And just some general questions from page 5 and page 6. The very bottom of page 5, I guess this would be to Mr. Elliott. The very bottom of page 5, it says development charges and certain planning and engineering fees charged to developers, although these other sources are usually used for new and growth projects or growth and new projects. So could you explain the usually part?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is just speaking of funding in general. This is still part of the introductory section of this document. It's important for us to clearly understand that when we talk about repair and replacement reserves and repair and replacement funding, that has to come from operating dollars. So it's operating dollars into the reserves into the capital projects. For growth-related items, there's a slew of different sources of funding that can be used in there, and that's DCs, engineering fees, development activity fees. We also, we've got capital grants in there from the province. They can be used for growth, or they can be used for R&R at times. And so I think the phrase usually used for growth is in relation to those other sources, the DCs, the engineering fees. There are times when sometimes the engineering fees are used to support the operations group because that's what they're doing. They're inspecting, they're managing the growth of the community
Thank you.
in their engineering activities.
Thank you. I'm still having difficulty with R&R has to come from the operating budget. Because we're talking about capital items?
Yes, we're talking about capital items, but it's existing infrastructure that has already been paid for, but when you first bought that asset, it was probably paid for with growth funding, development charges. You can't go to the DCs and ask them to refurbish your road. You can ask them to widen it, but you can't ask them to refurbish it. And so when we did the JOC, for example, a portion of that project was funded by existing tax-funded reserves for the repair and replacement component, because we had 9 Scanlon, and then the growth component was funded from DCs.
Thank you. And I do understand that, and of course that's the right way to go. But what I don't understand, and we can perhaps have this discussion later, is why are we using operating budget for capital items? I mean, if we're improving the JOC and part of it comes from DCs and part of it doesn't,
Councillor, I think what you'll find is that Mr. Elliott has to work under very strict guidelines from the various ministries, and that's defined by above his pay grade, if I may say.
Thank you. So the statement R&R has to come from the operating budget is mandated? Or is
R&R is existing assets, and so it cannot come from growth-related funding.
thank you. I understand that.
Okay.
We can talk later.
Yeah.
The other concern I have is that we are using monies that we may not, we're counting into the budget monies that we may not get, for example, from the federal gas tax. So it's a probability, but it's not an assurity. So I'm a little uncomfortable with that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may, the AMO and the FCM have gone to great strides in the last 5 years to secure long-term stable funding from the gas tax, and the federal government and the provincial government have committed to those. We have seen mappings now of the next 5 or 6 years of our gas tax entitlements. So we know in advance what they are.
Thank you. That's good news. What about the action plan and the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund? I don't think we have the same certainty with those.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have OCIF funding. We have a commitment for 3 years at this point on the formula portion. The project application basis is one area where we continue to have difficulty acquiring funds in that component. There's so many different components to these grant programs, but you're absolutely right. We've got to be careful how much we structure a firm financial plan around potentially disappearing funding. And for the most part, we are working on the best information we have, some good assumptions, but as you can see, by the size of that component, it's not a major component of our funding source. In the 2015-2016, you can see it's around 10% federal and provincial grants. That includes the gas tax, which is a guaranteed source for the most part. So 1 or 2% perhaps is at risk.
1 or 2% can be a big percentage at some points.
However, if I didn't include it, council would suggest that I'm not counting all of my eggs.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Daw. We've heard on a number of occasions with specific items that there are placeholders. We have placeholders for the Trails Master Plan. We have placeholders for the Wildlife Park in here. We have placeholders for the Streetscape Plan, and so, and for the Parks and Rec Master Plan. So I do agree with Councillor Abel that, we should have a placeholder in here for the Cultural Master Plan. But I do have a specific question that
Please.
follows through that. right? I don't see anything in the 10-year plan for the cultural precinct. We have an approved budget, a nominal budget of $5 million. So as a placeholder,
Approved budget,
we do. We have a motion on the record.
in principle. Mr.
So, but I'm
CEO.
just, I guess
Well,
perhaps
I'll-
clarify for me the
Go ahead,
process
CEO.
then.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the language that we have been using is a notional budget. So whether, I don't think we've actually brought something that says put $5 million into the plan in a formal way, but absolutely, we did want council to acknowledge that no matter which path they took, based on the work that had been done so far, that if council couldn't see its way to spend $5 million, there wasn't much point in going any further. So it's sort of in a gray zone, I would say.
Well, then my point would be that since we're talking about placeholders and it's prudent to at least put it on the forecast, I think it's the same thing. There are other items in this 10-year capital that have no approvals but have been placed on this. So why are they on it and not that, would be my question. We should treat all projects the same way, or, set up different rules I don't agree with.
Councillor Perry?
The reason is, like our Trails Master Plan, we've gone through an action planning process to figure out what needs to be done and how much money is being allocated, which is why the funding is identified in here. I just looked at our cultural study done by MDB, and they identified some overarching strategies, but there were no action plans. They had no costs identified. So I think the logical step would be to identify an action plan and costs. And once we do that, probably through a notice of motion at that point,
That is not the process we followed with many of the projects here. I can
Okay,
give you
hold on.
multiple examples of projects that don't have costs associated
I'm just
with
saying,
it.
for this one in
Council,
particular.
please. I would use the gray button, but it doesn't work anymore. Mr. Elliott, there's obviously a desire by council to include some additional items as placeholders in future budgets. What is the best time, would you suggest, to do that? Should we do that now, or should we do that perhaps as under new business later in the day? What would be your suggestion?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would suggest, let me just, I'll make some comment and then I'll come back to your question. With respect to the cultural precinct, my understanding is that, first, cultural precinct is not a DC eligible funding source, and so the funding source for this cultural precinct project is still up in the air in many respects. And I'll go out on a limb and say, if it's hydro, that's an easy answer. And there are no other commitments for the hydro money, as you know. In this 10-year plan, we're trying to map out, and that's why there's lots of placeholders in here. We're trying to map out the financial needs of the organization over the next 10 years. And when we know that we've got a facility study underway, and perhaps it could be $500,000 a year, we put that in so that financially we're preparing for that from an R&R perspective and from a funding sources perspective. For specifically culture, DC does not cover cultural facilities outright. And so the funding source is a little different. I would suggest that depending on the conversation of today, and I know that there's going to be some discussion around culture at the operating budget, following that, council may choose to either have a report or a workshop or something. We can then begin to shape up a longer-term vision for cultural investment and incorporate this into our plan for next year.
So specifically then, you're suggesting either a notice of motion is an example from Councillor Abel with respect to his request in terms of setting aside some monies. Would that happen in time for the 2017 budget?
Without playing, I shouldn't say, today there is a capital sheet that was added on the agenda for some cultural activity in the capital respect. In the operating budget, council will be seeing some decision units around cultural activity, which are operating activities. But you'll have some decision around operating activities, and that discussion may lead into a larger discussion about culture and the future of culture here at the town. And I know that there's some work undergoing with respect to a review of cultural governance and the whole overview there. Perhaps the CAO might be able to help me out here a little bit.
Mr. Nadev-Rosny? Hold on, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd suggest that if council wants to start putting money aside for cultural infrastructure, that you could add it to the 2017 capital spend, just like you would an envelope, and then we'd come back and figure out what you actually want to do with it. And I'd recommend that for the purpose, since we're here for the 2017 budget, that we would treat future years in terms of the 10-year plan, 18 and beyond, we'd come back with a plan for years 18 and beyond.
Mr. Elliott, does that make sense from your perspective?
Absolutely, it's from the CAO.
Councilor Abel.
Go ahead, sorry.
Well, I think when we talk about planning and 10-year capital, and we're being holistic and all buying in on this concept, we've obviously brought up a huge gap in my mind that is been overlooked. It's not, the word isn't even, it's in the title, but we have nothing in this plan. So are we going to do something about it? I'm sensing that we should be doing something about it.
Put some on the floor.
I don't know what it is, Mr. Mayor, because we do rely on staff to bring forward concepts for sort of approval. I'm going to be caught here. You know, I think we should be investing in culture, and we should be putting in a placeholder, and we should be spending a little more time on what that asset is. There's great references to all the other plans that we have here, parks and rec and trails and fleet replacement. I mean, great detail. We've got a master plan here, but we have absolutely no dialogue, no reference, nothing going on. So it's a great tool. It's a planning and economic development tool, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about long-term investments that make our community sustainable economically and environmentally, et cetera, et cetera. So, Mr. Mayor, I think we should be looking at this immediately, not saying put a notice of motion in and maybe we'll put it on 2018. We need to have some leadership in moving forward on this. It's very important.
Okay, my suggestion then is that we receive the 10-year capital investment plan as it is right now. So we're receiving it for information. We get into the specific items next. And I think at that point, put some general wording around a specific item for cultural action. That way it doesn't have really much effect on this plan. We're just receiving it for information. It's a guideline. And we can put it in as a specific capital item.
We need to dedicate some of our resources in
Well, that's what we're going to have to
forward.
do.
So it's staff, it's money, let's have a look at this and see what we can develop out of this. If we do believe it's going to be a valuable tool moving forward to add in, rather than it's not even mentioned at all. So I just think we have to correct that very soon. And if we don't have the staff resources to do it, we should create something along those lines. First of all, say we should have a department or something in economic and development.
Okay, I got to get
That
Councilor
speaks to
Thompson,
that, because
Councilor
there's a void here.
Baracus, Councilor Peary.
Your own words, Mayor Dollars, that this is a guideline. And I think it's prudent for us to have a 10-year capital plan looking ahead of the things that we need to do, we'd like to do, we're considering doing. Not everything in this plan is approved, it'll come back, but we have these placeholders. And all that I believe that Councilor Abel, myself, and some others are asking for is a placeholder in there, because I think it's fair to say that we will make an investment in the downtown core, we will make an investment in culture. We just want to have a placeholder put in it, and the simple solution is just to add those two items, give it a placeholder as part of the 10-year plan. I'm not asking for funds for 2017, but you know, rather than complicate things and do it on a specific, let's just put it as a placeholder. For now,
Councilor Thompson, make a motion.
I'll make a motion that an amount be allocated for the cultural master plan and for the cultural precinct in the 10-year capital plan.
How much?
I can't speak to the cultural master plan. I'll leave that with Mr. Downey, because you know, you look at the Trails Master Plan, you look at the Parks and Rec Master Plan, those things had some price tags associated with it. I don't have it in front of me. Perhaps Councillor Abel can give a specific amount, but you can do that. The nominal or the notional amount of $5 million for the cultural precinct, fine, put that in there. I mean, we've just said earlier that we have $10 million associated with a new library that probably won't happen, and we'll adjust it as we go through. Everybody was comfortable with that. Again, these are just placeholders.
Okay, but we need a number. We
So-
can't put a placeholder in without a number.
$5 million for the cultural precinct, $1 million for cultural master plan.
Whoa, double that.
$2 million. Right.
5 million.
No. But I'm fine with Mr. Downey coming back with a figure on that, but minimally, the cultural master plan is the $5 million, or cultural precinct.
Is there a second? Councillor Barakas? Comments or questions? Could you read that back, please, Madam Clerk?
I didn't get the.
Hold on, please. Okay.
Why don't I split it? I will split it because I can't speak to the cultural master plan. I'll let Councillor
Okay,
Abel
fair enough.
speak to the cultural master plan. But from the cultural precinct, $5 million as directed by council earlier this year, even if it was just a notional budget. It's a placeholder. And I don't, and
Okay, hold on. Second? Okay. Speakers to Councillor Thompson's amendment.
Be specific, this is to be added 2018 and beyond. Whatever you, right, 2019, whatever, I don't care. It's not for 2017. No.
Mr. Elliott, you're, okay. Hold on, I'm going to get the clerk to read back what she has. I was kind of hoping to take a break at 10:30.
Okay, so I have an amount of $5 million be allocated for the cultural precinct and be included in the 10-year capital investment plan.
Okay. Speakers to the motion. Councillor Berry, Councillor Humphreys.
So this is the problem we're getting into. I understand the $5 million, council made a decision on that. We don't know exactly what the projects are going to be, but we know that there are projects, we're looking at that. If we all take a look at our cultural master plan, there are no actions identified to be taking place. There are some themes, there are some strategies. I fully support investing in culture, but just to put money there in the future,
point of order, we're just speaking to the amendment, which is just for the cultural precinct, not the cultural master plan. I split it because I couldn't have put a value on
splitting
it.
is voting time, but not at this time,
So my motion is just for the cultural precinct.
Okay. Keep it in line, folks. Councillor Perry, are you finished?
If that's all we're talking to right now, we made that decision already.
To Councillor Thompson's amendment. Any other speakers to Councillor Thompson's amendment? Councillor Humphreys, apologies.
It's okay, through you, Mr. Mayor. Is it possible to put it on 2016's budget? I'm not suggesting it's going to
17?
happen. I'm sorry, 17, not 2000. I think I heard earlier is 2018. I'd like to consider for 2017 budget. Is that okay with this motion?
Mr. Elliott? It's a placeholder.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's a placeholder. What I'm hearing is that dropping $5 million into the out years is a relatively easy thing. If we're dropping a placeholder into 2017, we can do that under the detailed sheet section. There is a discussion around culture there, and perhaps that's where we make the amendment at that time for 2017. So let's focus on the out years with respect to this discussion at this time. And I'm hearing $5 million for cultural precinct, and we can do that. And so the recommendation would be that before we post this, we make that amendment and then post it.
Thank you. Okay, so from an operational, physical or logistical operational point of view, it makes sense in the out years at this point. Councillor Barakas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to also throw in, I don't think, if we did it for this year's budget, we would also have to identify the source, which is, which then we would get into a whole different conversation. So I think it's best for, at this point, is to leave it as Mr. Elliott stated, so.
To Councillor Thompson's amendment then, calling the vote. All in favor of the amendment? Contrary? That is carried. Thank you, Councillor Abel.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to put a notice of motion to put $60,000 for development of the cultural master plan for 2017 and a placeholder for oncoming years of $1 million for the long-term 10-year budget.
So 60,000 for 2017 and $1 million in the out years.
Yes.
Correct? Mr. Elliott, would it be easier to handle the 1 million now and then when we get into detail items to do the 60,000?
I would strongly suggest that, yes. Thank you.
Councillor Abel, you okay with that? So at this point, it would be $1 million in the out years with respect to the cultural master plan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Madam Clerk, you okay with that wording? Such as it such as it is.
So 1 million in
Yeah.
the 10-year capital
Yeah.
investment.
So a second for that. Then we'll address the 60,000 this afternoon, or later on when we get into the detailed plans. Councillor Thompson, you're seconding that. Comments or questions to Councillor Abel's amendment? $1 million. Yeah, no. Okay, so 1 million in the out years. Okay, we're good with that? Correct. All in, no, 1 million total in the out years. Yeah, $1 million total in the out years starting, which would start in 2018. 100,000 a year. I'm sorry? No, it's just placeholder, just a placeholder. Councillor Perry?
I would much rather we deal with the 60,000 now because that's the development of an action plan. So before we start putting money away in the future, I think it makes sense to develop an action plan with the work that we've done. I don't think it would cost 60,000. I think you could get it done for a lot less than 60,000.
Councillor, right now it's
But
strictly.
yeah, to the $100,000 a year, I don't know enough. We don't have an action plan in place. I don't want to just be making decisions for the sake of making decisions. I would like to be making decisions based on evidence and facts, and we don't have the information in front of us. So I will be voting against this.
Fair enough. Any other? So we're going to address the 60,000 when we get into the detail items. Right now, it's a placeholder in the out years. If there's no further comment or question, all in favor of that. Contrary, that is carried, Madam Clerk. Any other comments on the 10-year capital investment plan as presented by Mr. Elliott? Mr. Elliott, any wrap-up comments?
No, I think we're fine. We've got our 2 amendments that we can make. And I would suggest that before we jump to a break, while I've got the mic, is we talk about the approach on the next section so that
Thank you.
Perhaps we can think over our coffee.
Okay, well then, before I do that, let's all in favor then of receipt. Oh, we've done it. No, we haven't done. We have all in favor of receipt, please. As amended. Thank you. Contrary? That's carried. Mr. Elliott?
Before we break for coffee, I think, Mr. Chair, in the past couple of years, we have gone through this listing of R&R projects on a consent agenda approach. And so in the additions package today are revised summary sheets for R&R. There's a summary sheet for growth and new, it's a couple pages down, and a summary page for studies and other. And it might be appropriate during the coffee break and take a look at that and give thought to which items they'd like to pull for discussion today. Then we can move right back into that after our break.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Can I have a motion to recess until 11 o'clock, please? Councillor Tom, Councillor Perry, all in favor? Contrary? Carried. Thank you.